this is what else you need to know today. It's like soothing.
So are you looking to make our podcast something people can fall asleep to?
No, well,
because we release it at 1 a.m.
It's ASMR, right?
All about process. Yeah, we're going to get so many more listeners now, but not for the right reasons.
Yes.
Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast. In this show, we talk about our experiences and lessons learned in enterprise architecture and business process management. What's Your Baseline is designed to be for everyone. Newbies who are just getting started with these topics, organizations who want to improve their EA and BPM groups and the value they get from it, as well as practitioners who want to get a different perspective and care about the discipline.
Each episode will tackle different key topics, providing context, background, best practices, and stories from the road, inviting you to learn from our challenges and successes, and demonstrating key tools to help you set up your practice and get the most out of it.
I'm your host, Roland Wolt, and I'm joined today by my co-host, JM Erlinson.
Hey, JM, how are you doing today?
Not too bad, Roland. It's been a heck of a week and it's only Tuesday, so maybe I can say I'm doing well right now, but there's a long road to go. So I'm excited to be doing something really fun today and having a chat with you and one of our good friends.
That is true.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fine, and I'm looking forward to learn something new. For example, something about new processes. And for that, we have a very special guest from far away, in the country where the sun rises almost. Well, from Germany today. We have Mirko Kloppenburg here, who is running not only his own shop, but also runs the New Process podcast. So welcome, Mirko, to our little show.
Hey, welcome.
Yeah, thank you much for inviting me. It's an honor to be on your podcast today. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
Wow.
So, Mirko, maybe you give us a little bit of an intro who you are and obviously what that whole new process thing is about, which we're going to talk at length, obviously. Mm-hmm. But just to give us an idea and our listeners an idea who we have as a guest in our show today.
Yeah, for sure. As you already said, I'm from Germany. I'm living in Hamburg, beautiful town of Hamburg here, together with my wife, our 2 daughters. And yeah, I was working for more than 20 years for the Lufthansa Group. That's basically half of my life, which I did. I'm 41 years old now. And beginning of this year, I think in March, I left Lufthansa and started, as you already said, newprocesslab.com as a platform to rethink processes and to think about ways how to get to a more human-centric process management approach. That's what I'm doing right now.
That sounds very, very interesting. And I'm curious what the new processes are, but we will talk about that. Maybe give us a little bit more of your background. What were things that you've done in the past, your key experience, or also what are your hobbies and your bucket list items?
Okay. Yeah, I think it's all about processes, I would say. So I started working for Lufthansa Group back in 2001 while studying business information systems. I was working for Lufthansa Cargo at that time in Frankfurt. And I think already the first of my projects there was somehow thinking about complaints process. So that was my first contact to processes. And then at the end of university, I moved to Hamburg and started working for Lufthansa Technik there, helping them to introduce a process-oriented management system. Or it's an integrated management system, so coming from a quality management world there. And we try to replace all the existing old documentation, like lots of PDFs with written text explaining the employees what to do and how to do it, pages over pages. And I was working there as a process modeler, asking the people how they do something and put that into a tool. By the way, JM, that was Aris at that time.
Of course. Well, I mean, it's been around for so long. It makes sense you would have been using it back then.
Yeah, I don't remember the version number, but it was an interesting time.
It must be 3 or 4. I started with Aris back in 97 at the Deutsche Bahn, and that was Aris 3. And it was really not good looking at that point in time. And I stopped with that.
So it was interesting for us as well at that time. So in the background, we used Iris to map the processes, but we had our own front end there already because we always mapped the processes for the employees. And this has always been my personal challenge to inspire the people for processes. So while I was working as a process modeler, I really enjoyed sitting together with the experts, asking the questions and putting all their knowledge into the system. And then a little bit later, I switched to the central operations and I was more or less working on all the tasks to run and improve the system within the group and roll it out to all the daughter companies there. And as soon as we had processes which were executed at several locations, there was always the question on how to standardize these processes. So I was doing some research together with University of Bamberg on process standardization methodologies, and we standardized some really interesting processes. And I love having these workshops with colleagues from the different locations and doing workshops with people from different cultural backgrounds there. That was always something which fascinated me a lot. And at the end of all these standardization projects, there has always been the question, how do we now manage this process throughout all the different locations? How can we keep the standard? How can we keep up communications with the different locations to get their requirements and put that into the process design, get the cool local ideas, integrate them into the overall design and roll it out to the different locations. So these were the questions there. And again, we did additional research with University of Bamberg and developed process management role concept, like how to define the role of a process owner, of process architect, and so on. And then we rolled that out. So I had the chance to manage the project, to roll it out within the Lufthansa Technik Group first. And then later on, we also standardized in the context of a reorg project within the Lufthansa Group, the whole process excellence process for the Lufthansa Group with all the subsidiaries like Swiss and Austrian and so on. And we came up with a standardized process excellence process for all the 140,000 employees at that time. I was first the project manager for introducing this process. And this has been standardization on the highest level, I would say, with all the process management experts from the different locations. A lot of fun, but really hard work, I would say. And
a lot of hand holding, a lot of bringing people along with you, but little baby steps at a time, right?
Exactly. Very little steps. But we made it. We rolled out the process through the whole organization. And then there was something like COVID coming up. And
I heard about that. Whatever that was. Yes.
Actually, I can't remember, but I remember that I had to stay at home. In Germany, luckily, we have something which is called short-time work, where you still get money. You stay with the company, but the government pays you. And I used this time to think about my experience of all these years. In addition to all the process management stuff, I was also running cultural change project in Hamburg for Lufthansa Technik there as well, to think about all the requirements that we have for the future. And this is how new process was created as term. So on the one hand side, I try to bring in all my new work or new ways of working experiences, as well as process management on the other side. That's how the term new process was created. And I really enjoyed all the conversations with the people on LinkedIn. So there is a big BPM community, as you know, and parts of them are also very interested in this human-centric approach. And we had a lot of think tanks, developed the methodology and so on. And try to share the experiences that we all made on how to focus on the people again and not just on the numbers.
Yeah, I feel like that's a hard conversation to have with a lot of traditional sort of very old guard firms where it's an actuarial conversation around process. What is the metric that we're measuring by? Well, it's productivity. And how do we do that? Well, we measure times and costs. And we often lose the thread of humanity in that, because ultimately who's executing process for the most part is people. And while you have automation to support that, and you have automation to make decisions, and you have automation to ease workloads, we say this at the podcast a lot. If the person behind the screen doesn't want to do it, it's not going to get done. And in particular, with the Great Resignation, we're seeing such a focus on employee experience. I just got an invite today for a webinar on EX, which is now the new term, employee experience. And at the center of employee experience, well, I think we all agree on this podcast, is process. And with the design spec towards a human, you can change the way an internal process works. Tell me about what you've seen from like a pushback on that as you're having these conversations, or are people on board? And, is this new way of thinking becoming the norm for process design?
It should, I would say, but often it's not. So that's the real problem there. So my experience from all the workshops is that you quickly deep dive into all the numbers and try to find out how to make a process faster and so on. And then you lose the people. Or to make it even more faster, you just don't invite all the people. You just invite a very, very small sample of people and sit together and develop a process without asking the people out there what they really need. And that's often the experience which I made, not only within the Lufthansa world, also in other companies which I supported throughout all the years. And now I try to push the people to integrate all the people working in the process also into the work on the process, to make sure that the different views of the roles executing a process are involved into process design, for example.
So as a bean counter, I obviously would now ask you, have you done your ROI calculation on this? What does it bring to me that you involve those people? I just want to get the stuff done, get the passengers as quickly as possible from A to B. I don't care about the experience. I don't care how miserable, Mirko, you feel in doing this, just get it done. So
I know that. I know that. I had that feeling all the time in the past. And my experience there is that in the beginning, if you work according to a human-centric approach, it takes a little bit more time to set up the team, to onboard the people, to get them involved. But as soon as everybody understands the purpose of what you're doing there, and they have this common target picture of, for example, improving a process, then you definitely speed up with the process and you will be faster than without the people. That's my experience there.
Well, that's good to hear, I don't want to have it I don't want to live in a world where basically just our overlords tell us what to do. You now must consume, I think it's very important to have a purpose in what you're doing. So when you think about purpose of processes, purpose of people, well, the ultimate question that obviously comes to mind is why, and I know you have a special opinion about why that little short word with 3 letters is so important. So tell me, why is why so important when it comes to new process?
I think it all starts with my individual purpose, I would say. So purpose is often used as a buzzword right now, but it definitely makes sense to think about that. And there I differentiate between the two big areas, like the individual purpose on the one hand side, as well as an organizational purpose on the other side. And if there is a match between both worlds, that's perfect world I could achieve. So if I have the chance to work for a company where my individual purpose also contributes to the purpose of the company, that's perfect. And now imagine there are a lot of processes also in that organization, and this is something in the middle. So for each and every process of an organization, there should also be a process purpose defined. And this is what I recommend to develop as a process owner with your process community, to have something as guidance for the development of the process, design, the execution, and so on. And if this process purpose then is also matched by the individual purpose of the people working in the process, that's perfect. So just to give you an example, which I am using quite often for myself, is that I also used the time when I was not allowed to work to think about why I'm here, and was a lot thinking about my individual purpose there. And I came up with something which is called creating inspiring experiences. This is what I really love to do, what I enjoy, bring people together, solve problems, and create memories that inspire for the future. So creating inspiring experiences. And now this can be applied, for example, in surrounding where trainings are developed or workshops and so on. So if I do process workshops, this should be an inspiring experience for all the participants. And as long as I am allowed to do that, there is a match, and my individual purpose can perfectly contribute to the process purpose as well as to the organizational purpose.
I completely believe in that. And I think we're quite aligned on that. We have an expression around my house, which is, you can do anything for money for a while, but you can do something you love and you believe in forever. And finding that organizational alignment between people, between company, between, the purpose of the work is so important. This another example that is, we talk to a lot of people in consultative fashion. I mean, I'm sure you do the same thing as I do. And I know Roland has a big background in that. When you talk to people who don't understand why what they're doing matters, then you're essentially trying to sell them this idea of a mechanical operation that they must perform in order to receive money. And when it boils down to that, you're creating, at best, people who will be drones, not those who will feel impassioned about it, but people who will simply do the tasks until the workday is done. And those are the exact opposite of what you want to do. One thing I do, I work a lot with sales teams in my role, and I sit down with them and we talk about selling business process documentation and modeling software. And one of the things I say to them right off the bat is, listen, if you don't believe that what we do matters, that this process modeling and management and governance and collaboration, if you don't believe that practice matters, then talk to me, because you shouldn't be here if you don't believe that. And if you don't believe that this company is the best at doing that thing, or at very minimum, what our customers need to be able to do that function, then talk to me, because we don't want people misaligned with their purpose and with what our purpose is as an organization is. Otherwise, you have people going off and selling stuff they don't believe in. And once again, you can do anything for money for a while, but it'll burn you out. And ultimately, who suffers is everybody. All the people suffer. The customers get a worse experience. The people who are working at the company feel less connected, and the company sees less revenue. When you can actually align that, vertically integrated intention, what an amazing idea to propagate, because that means we have a connected everything from tip to tail, the company, the people, the customer. And that means everyone gets better service, has a better life, and ultimately does better work. I completely agree with that. Tell me about your life though. So what is your purpose in life? What is your personal purpose that's kept you alight during COVID, and that's caused this new process lab you talked about, creating inspiring things? What does that mean to you? What does that practically look like when you create those inspiring experiences?
Yeah, so looking back, what I really enjoyed throughout all the years was organizing workshops, setting up events, bringing people together. So being a host on the one hand side, and then doing something which is somehow inspiring for the people, like setting up simulations or mapping processes. Could also be a fun activity. Could. Does not necessarily have to be, but I always gave my best to make it a fun experience there. And solve problems. This is what I really love to do. So I'm very target-oriented, problem solving, and so on. And the last aspect then is to make this experience something which the people will remember, and they take that with them and can look back and be inspired based on what they just heard. So that's basically the idea there.
Well, that's all great, Mirko. And I agree with that. But obviously the devil is in the details. So how do you make that happen? How do you inspire people, and how do you create those experience that you have? Because like JM said, that might not be in the interest of the organization. And to add to JM's point before, it's all driven by the culture of the organization. If they don't care, they quote unquote don't care. Well, I can imagine it's pretty hard to inspire people for the task at hand that you have, redesigning a process, for example, or improving the process. So how do you inspire people for processes?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And it always depends. I would say, as you already said, it completely depends on the current situation of the organization you are looking at and the people you would like to work with. But in general, I would there refer to some principles like trust the people. Mm-hmm. So whenever you're working with them, really rely on their experience and let them bring in their ideas. So this is really important, and basically involve them into what you're doing there. And this does not necessarily has to be that all the employees working in one process participate in the same workshop. This is often impossible, but you can ask them, create transparency about what you are doing, and invite them to bring in their ideas. They don't have to be in the workshop all the time. They can also review the results, hand in their feedback, or just follow what you're doing. So by creating transparency and trust about what you're doing. So this would be basically what I would recommend there in the first step. And then think about ways to make it a fun and inspiring experience, like having workshop formats where the people can really experience processes, like setting up simulations where you execute a process where they can feel how process management works, how documentation can help them. So this is one of the paths I would always recommend to have a look into. I just recorded a podcast episode with Ole Tillmann, with whom we created something which is called the pizza game. So that was an example. Maybe you already heard about that because I shared some thoughts on that on LinkedIn as well. But there we had, we invited a lot of people to a workshop location, and they then split it up into smaller teams to form a pizza place where they prepared pizza and delivered this pizza to the customers according to a process design that we handed out to them. So they had a process description with swim lanes, roles, and the roles were assigned to the people within the workshop groups, and they used Post-its and scissors to cut the ingredients of the pizza, and then they baked the pizza and experienced how this process was executed. And then in the second step, they thought about how to improve that. And everything was measured. We had numbers. We could compare the results of the different workshops there, or of the different pizza places. And we also standardized and so on. So this was something which was really inspiring for all the participants. And they could feel how this process design looks like in reality, and how process management can be applied to document, execute, improve, and so on processes.
Yeah, there's a extra step beforehand when you do that exercise again that I've done in the past. Obviously, the example was creating a PB&J, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? And in this case, I know, very American here, but in this case, we said, separate the people into different groups. And we said, okay, document your process. We don't care how you do this. Some people wrote it down, some use stickies, some draw a process model and whatnot. And then we just took those descriptions and gave them to the other group. And then we said, okay, now follow those instructions to the T, right? To the point, and it was very interesting that a lot of the outcomes were not peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So
that's a cool example. I put that into my toolbox, I would say.
The gist was, handovers are important. right?
Definitely.
You need to have a common understanding, a common exchange format, whatever you put in there. But you must create your design in a way that somebody else can follow it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And that's the other thing about process is that people think about process all the time, all day. I mean, they do process. Process is a very human experience. You just might not conceptualize it and understand it as a process. People call it lots of different things. They might call it a to-do list. They might call it, I have a bunch of tasks and I have to check them off. I have to, take a look at I have to do these things in this order because I'm following a recipe. There's lots of different words you might use to describe process, but it is really a process. Just where we're finding ways in documenting processes that traverse experiences and backgrounds. People don't have to have the same context to be able to do the same tasks. A perfect example of that is, I do a lot of business in Japan. And one of the things that I struggled with early on in my professional career with the Japanese buyers is that there's a lot of assumptions that come along with working in that cultural context that I simply didn't know. And so it's sort of those everybody knows things, but when no one writes them down, you have no way of understanding why things are not working the way that you think they're supposed to work. And that's because the process has this underlying thread of sort of a cultural overlay, I guess you would put it as a context. And that's why documenting is so important, because as Roland said, if you don't have all those things laid out, then somebody coming in without that context will just not get the same results. And that's the thing you want least, a process that leads to multiple outcomes with the same action, right? So the question then to you is, okay, so you're talking about building process through involved exercises. You're bringing people in, you're inviting them into the conversation. What does that mean as they go back to their organizations? How does this become part of their practice in the companies they work on, and practice in a personal life? How does this turn into a life cycle that they can follow?
Yeah. So to give it a little bit more structure, what I developed together with the new process community is something which is called the new process life cycle. So it's basically a process of process management, which starts with developing process purpose as first phase, and then developing process strategy, designing the process, mapping the process, implementing it, and steering process execution as an overall life cycle, and also making sure that you improve process execution at the end and bring all the local ideas back to the overall life cycle. So this is basically the methodology which I'm using. There is a role concept behind, and this is where you can place all these so-called new process principles. Like I just explained, trust the people working in the process, or involve the people working in the process into the work on the process. So both principles can be applied in different phases, like to trust the people. If you're going to design a process, then design the process in a way that the people get all the knowledge they need to make independent decisions. That's part of the design phase, for example. Yeah.
If I can just touch on the trust thing for 1 second, because it's actually been a conversation. I'm involved in a lot of change management stuff in the organization that I work with as well. And one of the big topics that comes up a lot is trust, right? I have a principle in my own personal life and with the people I work with in the company that I run, which is, a really simple binary: trust people or fire people. If you trust people to do a job, then let them do their job. And if you don't trust people to do that job, they really shouldn't be working for you. They should be finding another avenue of employment or another thing that they can do. And I know not everyone has a privilege to find new vocations. I get that. I understand that. But it just as a principle, you should be trusting employees. And I feel like there's a lot of this big divide between organization and employee right now. And I think part of that divide is built up with this sort of erosion of trust. The company says, I think my employees are stealing from me. They're trying to cheat me out of every dollar. And employees thinking, I think my organization is trying to exploit me, take every piece of my, working capital they can. And they're both kind of right and they're both kind of wrong. Somebody has to reach the olive branch out. And process is that great interlink between organization and its people. So if you trust people through that process, I can see how that's kind of the breaking of chicken and egg. That is the olive branch that starts the conversation about trust. when you got that sort of enshrined in how you approach process. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is then in the end also reflected by the process design. So if you trust your people, you can take out approval steps, for example. So that's basically one of the ways to prove this trust to the people, by taking approval steps out of the processes, or just by providing information and not keeping information as a secret. So these are just two examples of how you can put that into process design as well.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. And shameless pitch, we also had a What's Your Baseline shorts about process empathy. So Mirko, if you haven't listened to it, you definitely want to listen to that. But I think there's a little bit more that comes to it. And I want to bring this segment a little bit to a close now. But I think bringing those principles to life obviously means to do more things than just running process workshops. And I know you're doing more on that. And it would be great if you could maybe in a minute or two enlighten our customers what other areas would be worth focusing on.
Process aspects are just one part, and there's way more on how to inspire people for processes. So one methodology I really love to apply is to drive community building. So especially with regards to process community. So if you are a process owner, you do have the community of all the people working in your process. There you should think about how to develop, how to build this community. And there are good ways to do that. We can talk about that later. Another way is to go more into something which I would call experience design. I already explained some parts of that, to make workshops a real experience for the people, or think about simulations and so on. And the last thing I'm thinking about right now is something like being a process influencer, like using all the things that we know from the social media world out there. Setting up process podcasts, interviewing process architects in your organization to share their knowledge there, using more videos and so on. So this is also something which I'm currently exploring with another customer of mine. We're just setting up a process podcast there, and that's super exciting because it's very easy for all the employees to access that information and to inform themselves about what is going on there.
So it's an internal podcast that you set up. It's not for public consumption, correct?
Yeah, it depends. Normally it's just internal because of all the corporate guidelines, but would be super interesting to do that in public as well. But I'm still looking for an organization which is willing to provide these insights to the outside world, talking about processes there. Unfortunately, they are very, very shy at the moment, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I'm working on something similar right now. I feel like we use the tools to market to our customers that we don't use to market to our own people, which seems crazy. We have experience in reaching people, really, truly connecting with them, but only when we want to sell them stuff. How about when we want them to feel invested in the company that they're working for? How about that? We could use those same tools. I feel like that's a silly thing we're missing.
Yeah.
But I think I want to bring this section to a close and leave our audience with just a little bit of a break, because there's a lot of great information, great thought leadership that's already come about in this episode. And so turning it back on you folks, think about how you approach process in your organization and in your life. What are you really thinking about first when you talk about process? What are you looking at first? And how are you connecting that process with people, their experiences, what inspires, what moves them? Or maybe where are you falling short to make that connection, that vertical integration of intention? We'll leave you for a moment and come back with our second section of the podcast, The How. 'Cause today I'm fine.
And welcome back to our second segment of this very enlightening and inspiring conversation with Mirko. Mirko, you mentioned at the end of segment 1 the new process, right? The new process principles. And I would love to have you dive a little bit deeper into this, because it sounds all good what you said, but obviously the proof is in the pudding. How do you bring those ideas to the road? How do you make it successful? So maybe you can give us some examples of how you applied the principles that you mentioned in real life.
Okay, for sure. So let's pick up an example or a principle we already talked about, like involve the people working in the process into the work on the process. So as I already said, I was doing a lot of standardization workshops in the past. And that's one part where you can easily apply that. So with regards to the new process lifecycle, that's part of the design phase. So that's the creative part where you have these workshops, bring the people together and create the process design before mapping that in a formal way. And setting up these workshops, I would always recommend to think about inviting the right people there. First, to communicate what you are planning to do to all the people out there, to create transparency on what is coming up, and then offer the people, the experts working in the process, to participate in the workshop. And this does not have to be always on site. Could also be online, or as I said, they can simply comment on the results or just follow what is going on there. So this will be one example for putting that into practice.
If I can ask you a quick question, then how do I determine who the right people are to bring in? Is it literally everyone who touches the process? Because that could seem really cumbersome. What's my targeted strategy?
Yeah, I would always recommend to steer that a little bit based on the different roles being part of the process. So make sure that within a workshop, the views of the different roles are represented on the one hand side. And then the second aspect for me would be to have a look at the different instances of the process. So could be different locations, or for different products, or for different customer groups where you execute the process, and then make sure that these are represented as well. So with regards to locations, that's the most common case, I would say. Have a look at all the locations executing the process, and then make sure that the small ones are represented in the workshop as well as the bigger locations, to have a good setup of the workshop group to make sure that all the different requirements are somehow represented in the workshop.
So you're like sampling the population to make sure that you have an even demographic of all the different ways it can be executed. Yeah,
I would always be as open as possible and invite them. And often it turns out that not all the people would like to travel and be there on site and so on. So often this sample is created automatically in a perfect way, and you just have to add a little bit here and there and make sure that all the different aspects are represented. Yeah.
Right. But the invitation itself is a gift, right? Because the invitation encourages involvement, even if you don't end up becoming involved. I dig that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the end, you are still invited to comment on the results. That's always a good option. So you don't have to spend all the time for the workshops, but you can still bring in your ideas and review what was done there and comment on that. Or you're just invited to follow. So that would be, for me, the minimum participation there. And that's even better than not knowing about what is going on.
And this is obviously one of your 4 principles. The other one that we spoke about was trust in people. The other one was creating meaning. But I found it very interesting that you have one of the principles that talks about fostering the development of people. Right. So how do you bring somebody who might or might not be interested in that work in the first place? My boss sent me to do this. How do you bring those people forward?
Yeah. So there I have to go back to trust the people. But just to answer quickly your question there, take them serious, ask them for their opinion, let them explain how they are doing the process, how they are experiencing that, what their best practices are, what they would recommend to avoid, and then integrate that into the workshop. So that's also part of involving the people, I would say. But picking up, foster the development of the people, which you just mentioned there. This is part of the implementation phase. So as soon as you have a new process design and would like to roll it out, then there should be more than just sending out an email. Hey, this is a new process, and now please work according to this documentation here, which you can find in this and that tool. So already start within the design phase, talk to the experts and ask them, what do you think? What do we need to roll out the process afterwards, to train the people, to enable them for executing the process? And then think about formats which go far beyond than just sending out an email. So like having an online training or on-site training, or I also know examples where we have set up an 11 days training for process architects in that case to, bring the people together which are executing a specific role, explain them how the process looks like and how they can apply that, how can take the benefits out of it, and so on. So this should be part of fostering the development of the people.
That also means you're approaching this with humility, because I'm hearing you asking people, how do I do this? A lot of consultants have this facade of, I know everything. What sounds like you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that the biggest value that you bring is a process-oriented mindset. And what they contribute to it is domain expertise, knowledge, the organizational context, and you synthesize that together. So that's really what you're doing, is a synthesis of all these perspectives brought together into something that we can all agree on. That's a different value than what most people in a consulting role think of themselves as providing. How do you make that shift in the buyers? How do you convince your executives that are sponsoring this workshop that synthesis is a value, it's a higher value than coming with a solution?
Yeah, I think all the customers, they normally know what they are doing. They know their business, they know their processes. And what I can bring in is just methodology and structure to bring that forward, to move what they already have to the next level. And therefore, it's best to ask the people what they are doing and then support them with a process on how to improve processes, for example, and train them, enable them so that they can improve the processes on their own. That's basically what I'm doing.
So I'm definitely looking forward, maybe not this year, but next year, hope, to the book that you write, Mirko Kloppenburg, New Process Lab Tool Book, to get all your experiences in a not only digestible format, but also in a repeatable format, because I think it sounds like common sense, a lot of the things that you say, but we all know that common sense is not equally distributed. So,
oh no.
Yes. So I think it would be very helpful to have a reference, hint, that might be available for people to use this.
Yeah. A book would be great, yeah. But right now, just to add that there, you can find all that on newprocesslab.com. So that's where I try to integrate all these ideas into a reference model, like the new process lifecycle. Parts of that are already online available, but maybe in the end there will be a book. I don't know yet.
Well, here we go. You heard it first, guys. On the What's Your Baseline podcast.
Yeah, and of course, once it's a book, then suddenly people can refer to it. Oh yeah, I'm using the Kloppenburg method. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is just like an ingrained practice in the industry. Don't worry about it. Listen, go read his book.
Yeah, or when you want. Oh, I just pulled a Kloppenburg. It's all good.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But in all seriousness, let's move on a little bit, because I think we now get a good understanding what the principles are, how the process that you describe obviously goes. But how do you bring this actually to life, right? What if you're a new customer, they're approaching you, hey, Mirko, I have a bunch of money that I want to throw at you. I think I'm convinced about what you're doing, reading stuff about you and your ideas on the website. Well, I want to work with you, Mirko. So what are you doing for me?
Yeah. So first is check where you are. So what do you already have? Do you have something like a framework already set up? If not, first step for me would be to think about the why of processes. So the purpose of process management itself, what would you like to achieve? And then build the process of process management based on this purpose. And therefore, again, as I already said, the new process lifecycle is a good reference model, which you can use as basis and then just adopt it to what you need within your organization. And the first phase of the new process lifecycle is to define process purpose. And this can be done for each and every business process, as well as for process management itself. And that's basically where it all starts then. What I always recommend to set up a workshop, to invite a nice sample of people who are interested in process management and think about the purpose of process management within the organization, and then build your community based on this. So for sure, there are specific requirements within each organization and project which want to be supported by the processes. But if you have the freedom to follow a main track there, I would start just applying what you tell all the people out there to the process of process management itself. And that starts with purpose. And use that to build your community, to inspire the people, and then design the process of process management and roll it out. Train the people. So assign the process owners, the process architects, and train these roles, support them to do their work.
I actually have a question about that. You just mentioned roles. Tell me a little bit about the people who are responsible at sort of each part of these process phases to keep the new process principles in mind. Like who's responsible for allocating these principles across design, strategy, modeling, implementation? Like who does this work? And is it one person? Is it a team? You've talked about the community, but how do you break that down?
Yeah. So there are different levels. On a strategic level, I'm using the role of a process domain owner. That's the one being accountable for the strategy of a group of processes, so a process domain. That's also the one which appoints the process owners of the specific business processes in the domain. So the process owner is then accountable for the design of this business process. Both roles are more or less on a management level because they have this accountability for strategy as well as the design of the process, and they both need helping hands. And therefore, in my role concept, there is a role called the process architect. That's on an employee, on an expert level, often someone who's a project manager, who's driving the improvement of the specific business process. And that's, I would say, in a bottom-up approach, the key role which should be enabled to drive process management. So you can pick that role for a specific business process, find that employee, and then train that person on running the process lifecycle. So support the architect to develop a process purpose for a specific business process, or for the one the architect is responsible for. It's really important to differentiate there with regards to RACI classification. And then this person can apply the new process principles throughout the phases. So like setting up workshops to design the process and so on. Same then again, as we already talked about.
Yeah, you've used ownership in two spaces, a domain owner and a process owner. I know a lot of companies really struggle with ownership. Everybody wants to have, the ability to claim something as their own, but no one wants the responsibility in the case it fails. How do you break through organizational barriers towards this concept of ownership? Because I've seen a ton of people push back on this idea.
Okay, should we really open up that topic here?
Honestly, it's like I'm sure our audience is thinking of the same thing I am, which is I can't get anyone to ever own anything, or I can't get anyone to stop owning things and let people work.
Yeah, therefore I have to add some theory, I would say, because basis of the role concept is to differentiate between design on the one hand side and use the roles I just explained, and on the other hand we have execution, and this is what the norm normal top management is used to do. Yeah, they are the line managers executing or leading the employees executing the processes. And what is now really important to understand is that we can split up these responsibilities into design on the one hand side as well as execution on the other side. And they can take over both roles. So as a domain owner, they can also take over the role of the highest line manager of the organization and make sure that the organization executes all these processes. And then we go one level further down, and often also the process owner is on the other side accountable for the execution of this specific process. If you're talking about processes executed at several locations, then we often have the case that the process owner is not accountable for the execution at all locations. But just to give you an idea, that's the basis behind the theory there to split between these two responsibilities, and to explain that to top management as well, that they know being accountable for execution from the past. And now we are adding a role and making it visible that there is also a role being accountable for the strategic direction of the processes, as well as for the definition of processes, like having the process owner. And that really helps to make these roles visible also to top management, used to working in a hierarchy for decades, I would say. That's the most important step there, and explain them the benefits of splitting up these roles and making process responsibility visible.
What you're saying is that this split between the strategic focus and the operational focus, the two being conflated, in a lot of organizations, is causing this turbulence in the way people approach ownership. And if you can clarify and give visibility, transparency to that ownership and show the duality of that role, you can gain a lot more consensus and support, both upwards and downwards. That's amazing. I love that. And that can help break through some of those organizational challenges we talked about before. I love it. So now let's move to the individual, right? Because we've been talking a lot about the principles behind this. What can you do as an individual to make this come to life? And not just in the operations, but in how you behave yourself and the way in which you communicate. What does it mean to be, I see it on the page, but also I've heard you talk about it before, a process influencer?
Yeah, let's pick up the example of the process architect I talked about before. So on an operational level, we have an expert for a specific business process. So whatever process you would like to pick, like some operational processes where you have workshops all around the world where you are producing something. Maybe there we have a process architect somewhere located in the headquarters, and that person now wants to improve this specific production process. And there are people all around the world working in that process and talking to the architect, what their requirements are, and so on. And that's the process community there. And I would recommend to this process architect to think like an influencer, like a process influencer, to build your own process community, and keep them informed by, for example, setting up a podcast, or a video format where you just visit the colleagues at the different locations, ask them what they are doing, and then share that online. Maybe only company internally, but maybe also beyond the borders of the organization, and get your ideas out to the people there. That's basically behind that.
Yeah, and one thing that we have in our organization that I work now is we're using Slack, and we do have some Slack channels, that are used for communicating stuff, and two Slack channels are very good, and I forgot what the actual names are, so take it with a grain of salt. But one was basically, hey, this is what I did very good today, that the little celebrations that you have, right? And then we have another one, which is the self-proclaimed wall of shame, oh, I screwed up, The message is, this is an indication of the company culture. If you're willing to share wins and losses that you have, I think that's a very, very good thing, and that you're in a healthy organization if this open communication can be possible. And I think I can imagine it's super hard for some of the more traditional organizations to make that jump. like, oh, what's the value of this? And why should I do this? And all those, blah, 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 that the naysayers in there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But this is what I would recommend to all the people out there being responsible or even accountable for a specific business process to push that forward. And this can also be applied on a meta level if you are responsible or accountable for process management in an organization. So think like an influencer and use the tools, like podcasts, videos, and so on. Build your community and entertain them and inspire them.
Wonderful. And these are really good messages to take forward to all of our listeners out there who are looking to make a change in their organization in the way that they personally approach process, and really bring the human-centric approach into the design and propagation of best practices. Now, we want to leave you with a question before we go to our last break of the episode, to think about the new process life cycle we discussed, the trust involving people, fostering their development, and connecting meaning. How do you think you can apply that to you and your organization? How can you become that process influencer? What are your next steps to bringing that to life? You've heard a lot of ideas here. Let's take it back to you. Let's give you those tools and take a couple of seconds to think about them as we leave you for a quick break before we come back with our last thoughts and the conclusion to the episode.
All right, welcome back. And there's one thing, Mirko, that I always wanted to ask you, because we were talking about people all the time. But I know that you had some polls on LinkedIn about which tools to use and all the whatever modern process management things that vendors want to sell to you. One of those, which is obviously one of the topics that I think personally we talk way too much on this podcast, but JM might disagree with me, is a little bit, is process mining, and task mining and all these things, which are explicitly non-human. By definition, you look at data, you say, screw it, what your SMEs want to tell you. We want to see the hard facts and only the hard facts. So, Mirko, what is your opinion on these things, or simulation and all those things that modern tools bring to the table?
Yeah, definitely part of new process as well, because in the end, it's all about people there. Mm-hmm. And what I would recommend there is to do it together with the people. So set up a workshop for process mining, tell the people upfront what you're going to do, explain the methodology, and then do it together. So have a look at the results together, interpret it together, and create recommendations on how to proceed, how to improve the process based on process mining results there. So it definitely makes sense to have that as part of what you're doing with a new process as well.
Oh, good. Then I'm relieved,
Yeah.
Glad that we could clarify this. So going on forward, and I know we're getting to the top of the hour, and obviously we're too chatty anyways. Where can people find more information about you, about the new process approach and on all these things?
Yeah, I think first address to go is newprocesslab.com. Mm-hmm. That's the platform which I'm using to develop the new process community, where you can find a toolbox with details on the new process lifecycle, on the principles, the role concept, and so on. That's all there. And in addition, one of the experiments I started, and that was a lifetime dream of myself, to start my own podcast. And this is called the New Process Podcast. That's also a place to go for sure, with some interesting episodes already. Mm-hmm. Not that much as you have here at your podcast, but I had some really nice guests. Mm-hmm. And one of them is here as well.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. It was a really good time.
Yeah, so let's see how we'll match the publishing of both episodes. But there will be an interesting episode with JM as well. So that's for sure something I can recommend. And then just follow me on LinkedIn, because that's my primary outlet where I share my ideas and which you can use to follow me.
Yeah, and be assured that we will put all the links, graphics, and obviously the contact information into our show notes, my dear listeners, so that you don't have to hunt for those information. If you want to follow Mirko's ideas going on forward and listen to his excellent podcast in the podcatcher of your choice.
And of course, that leads us to a very big thank you to Mirko. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful episode. We really appreciate having you on. This was such a refreshing, it was a breath of fresh air of people first as an approach. And when Roland talks about the website and all the notes, of course, you can head over to whatsyourbaseline.com for lots of great thought leadership and articles, a link to all of our podcasts, or for specifically this podcast, whatsyourbaseline.com/episode 33, where you're going to see and all the different components of what we talked about today, including links to the New Process Lab. But of course, you can go to newprocesslab.com/checklist for a process checklist, or newprocesslab.com/podcast to hear more from Mirko and all the amazing things he does with New Process Lab. But until our next time together, friends, I've been J.M. Erlinson,
Mirko Kloppenburg,
and I'm Roland Volt.
And we will see you in the next one.